where I would like to get to with all of this stuff is that every practitioner and every person making decisions in the product development lifecycle has information about the consequence of their decisions.
Hello, and welcome to Environment Variables, brought to you by the Green Software Foundation. In each episode, we discuss the latest news and events surrounding green software. On our show, you can expect candid conversations with top experts in their field who have a passion for how to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of software. I'm your host, Chris Adams. Hello, and welcome to Environment Variables, where we bring you the latest news and updates from the world of sustainable software development. I'm your host, Chris Adams. If you want to measure the carbon footprint of any digital activity, it's useful to know that there is now a standard out there called Software Carbon Intensity from the Green Software Foundation that basically shows you how to do that. This is now a proper standard registered with the International Standards Association organization based in Switzerland. And while you can download the entire standard for free from sci.greensoftware.foundation, if you really want to, you can also pay 62 Swiss francs to download a PDF of essentially the exact same info to make it feel more official, just like with all the other standards that are available from the ISO. However, just because something is a standard, it doesn't mean it's really easy to use. And if you want to make a standard flexible, it can often be harder to learn to use. So earlier this year, there was an effort to start a new, more focused standard called SCI-Web, or Software Carbon Intensity for the Web. And this was intended specifically to make it easier to measure the carbon emissions from using the web. And this was a project working with W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, who we've had on this podcast before. Now, this is an ongoing project running inside the Green Software Foundation, but earlier this year, I learned that entirely independently, some folks in the UK had published a paper called Software Carbon Intensity for the Web, for measuring energy and emissions for web applications. I read it, I found it really interesting, and when I asked the authors to come on to talk about it, I was overjoyed that they said yes. Because I found they'd built a whole platform to demonstrate the ideas in their paper as well. It wasn't just abstract. So they had been wrestling with many of the problems people have when they try to measure the footprint of anything, particularly a website. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And that's who I have joining me today, Adam and Ollie. Adam, Ollie, can I give you a bit of space to introduce yourselves, say what you're doing and what's keeping you busy these days? I'll start with Adam because alphabetically you're ahead of Ollie. And we'll go from there, right? Adam, over to you.
Sure, yeah. I am alphabetically ahead of most people. There's a few Aarons and Abigails and Abrahams and things, but yes, I am. So I'm Adam Newman. I'm the Managing Director of Root and Branch Digital, which I run with Oliver here. And one of the things that I've done recently, very recently, is that my parents, who have moved house, had two of my drum kits from when I was a kid, and so I had to go and collect them. And now I have in this shed and in the house two drum kits. And I set one up last week with my children, Isaac and Alex, and we had a lot of fun. I had it's definitely lost some of my ability to drum. So yeah, that was something fun that I've been involved in. That's not work.
I was not expecting that. So one drum kit per child, right?
Well, there was, but there was only enough room to set one of them up, so they had to share and fight over it. But that was all fun.
You, sir, are a braver man than myself, and I suspect possibly more patient with the ears as well. Ollie, thank you, Adam. Ollie, can I hand over to you as well, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, I'm Ollie, the other half of Root and Branch. I'm not sure whether I'm Root or Branch. We have yet to decide that. I basically take care of all the techie stuff at Root and Branch. And what have I done recently? I recently got back from EcoCompute, which is an absolutely amazing tech conference all about digital sustainability and the like. And I actually met you in person, Chris.
You did.
And
yeah.
we said
we
hello.
Both have links. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's really good.
Cool. You did mention that you were staying in a floating hotel. I think you called it a boatel or something along those lines. Was that still the place? Yeah.
Yes, that is definitely the place. It was actually really good. I didn't know what to expect. I was running out of time to find a place to stay in Berlin, and I found a boat, and that's where I decided to stay, and it's really good.
Cool, thank you. So that's, I think, my portmanteau of the day will be botels. I didn't know that such a thing existed. Maybe there should be Airbnb for boats. Okay, we'll stop here. Let's get on. Let's go on to the podcast. All right. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, I am the host of this podcast, and I work at a small Dutch nonprofit. This is Chris Adams speaking, called the Green Web Foundation. We're a nonprofit focused on a fossil-free internet by 2030, and I also work as one of the one of the co-chairs in the policy working group at the Green Software Foundation, and I am also one of the nominated leads on the software carbon intensity for web assembly within the Green Software Foundation. This is on the track to creating a standard in the end, but that's my involvement here. Also, I will be working diligently with Adam and Ollie to put together some useful show notes. So if there's any links to projects we discuss, we will do our best to make sure they're accessible for you at the end of this show and the end of on this page, so that you can continue your quest to learn more about how to manage and reduce the carbon footprint of software. All right, Adam, Ollie, I'm calling you from hipster ground zero, Kreuzberg today, which is increasingly dark and grey. Where are you folks calling from? And maybe I could just touch a little bit about, where you're, let me know where you're calling, and then we can dive into the nerdery. So I'll start with, I don't know, you're both in the same place, right? Maybe Adam again, you're...
Sure. We are both based just outside of Brighton, so our office is in Brighton, actually on Sussex University campus. There's an innovation centre there. So we're East Sussexy people. Ollie lives in a place called Hassocks. I live in a place called Hurstpierpoint, and they are really close together, so we see far too much of each other.
Okay. All right, and then Ollie, you're basically in the same place. You're both Brightoners, or
Yeah,
along those
basically,
lines,
we both lived in Brighton for many years, and then as the prices became exorbitant and families started to emerge, we both moved out of the city, and we're very close to Brighton. We're literally the other side of the South Downs. So.
Okay, and I'm speaking as a former British person. You still can afford, like, fish and chips is still an affordable meal, right? Like good fish, because you cannot get good fish and chips in Europe, in my understanding so far. That's still within reach these days, yeah.
I think just about it's affordable as a once a week, once a month. I'm not sure if it's a daily thing, perhaps not. It's pretty. I mean, it depends. If you have it on the seafront on the pier, then it's perhaps less so. But yeah.
All right then. Okay, so fried potatoes and fried fish is still within reach, within reason. All
Yes.
right, gotcha. Okay, and before we dive into website calculation, I should just ask, like, I mean, what did you folks do before you got into this? I understand, like, when I've been on video calls before, on the prep call, I saw like a chalkboard, a blackboard with a bunch of chalk and various kind of equations on this. Maybe we could, like, was there a maths background, or did you just like sketching? Maybe I could get a little bit of background there, because I think some of those did follow through into the paper when I was reading about the SCI-Web paper in the first place.
Yeah, Adam's background is maths. I'll let him to sort of describe what that is all about in a sec. But my academic background is in AI. Before it was cool, before AI started taking over the world, and then I was just a freelance developer for a long time after working in various jobs mostly in the motion capture world. So I was developing biomechanics software for inertial motion capture systems. And then I had a little stint in green energy developing, and this is the time that I actually got to use the AI stuff that I learned in uni, because we were developing a kite that generates energy from the wind. So we were developing a control system for autopiloting a kite. And then from that, I decided that I can't go back and work in a normal 9-to-5 job anymore, because that was kind of a crazy project to be involved in. And I set myself up as a developer for hire. And then we decided to join teams, me and Adam, and set up Root and Branch. That's my life story anyway.
So AI hipster doing it before it was cool, and then controlling flying wind turbine kites which harvest power from the sky. That sounds very, very solar punk. Yeah, we'll have to share a link to that in the show notes, because I think people need to see what that looks like. I know that I do as well. Okay, and Adam, what about you before we dive into websites?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to get you further back for a very good reason. They're going to link it back to the fish and chips in a second. So I grew up in Coventry, and I moved to Brighton as a young adult. And in Coventry, which is where I'm going today, you can get something called a scallop batch, which is not what you think it is, because it's not scallops the fish, which I discovered when I moved out of Coventry. It's like a potato, a big round potato in batter, in a batch, which is Coventry, they're called a batch, but it's a roll or a cob or a barn cake or whatever you call it. Obviously butter and sauce and stuff. So that's how I do. That's the affordable way to do the chippy.
Okay.
So anyway, Coventry, moved to Brighton. I played in a band for a few years. Then I studied maths at home actually, and applied for uni. And that is where I met Oliver Winks in a computing lab. I had a placement in my second or third year. And Ollie was studying his PhD at the time, and that's how we met. And then fast forward a few years, we both went off into software roles. And yeah, then we kind of got interested in all this stuff, and that's how
Hence
this
Root
all
and Branch,
happened.
and then all the projects, and then the papers, and I think
Exactly.
cardamom and stuff like that. Okay, so maybe the thing I should probably ask then is that I've referred to this paper and this idea, like where essentially the two of you are laying out, okay, here's one way to take this idea, which is a standardized thing, software carbon intensity, and apply it to websites. Maybe one of you could explain like why you just decided to do this for the first, and then maybe some of the kind of like highlights where there's a couple of things you might want to draw people's attention to. If we can talk a little bit about that, then that would actually help dive into some of the specifics about, okay, here's how it should work, and then we can share with the listeners how it's intended to work, and then we talk a little bit about, okay, now that we've said how it works, how does that show up in terms of code or a working thing that you might use, for example?
Well, I mean, we started because we got into this whole digital sustainability space. It was basically a question that I wanted to know the answer to, and I didn't have any way of answering that question, which is, what's the environmental impact of the code that I wrote? Because I assumed that it would have an impact. And I asked Adam, because he's a mathsy nerd, and he didn't know. And so we thought, well, we're going to have to measure it, right? We're going to have to actually answer this question ourselves. And so we figured that if you are actually going to make a difference in the environmental impact of code, you can't make any changes if you can't measure the thing that you want to make changes to. So we sat down and started designing a way of measuring the energy consumption of individual processes. And then one thing kind of led to another. That was only meant to be like a little experiment. One thing led to another, and it kind of all got out of hand. And we ended up making what is now cardamon. That is a misspelling of cardamom. It's cardamon with a N at the end.
Like monitor, presumably, right?
Exactly, yeah. Because we called the project the Carbon Dashboard and Monitor, Live Monitor. And now the name is kind of stuck.
Cardamon. Yeah, so carbon.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Thank you for explaining to me. I didn't quite make that connection. But.
Yeah. So that's how it kind of all started. And this happened at pretty much the same time, or very close to the time that the Green Software Foundation was coming out with the SCI, the Software Carbon Intensity Standard. So whilst we were doing this work, we thought, well, there's this new ISO standard. How can we tie the work that we're doing to something that there is some agreement around? And so we started kind of writing all of the maths with the SCI embedded right at the foundation of it, and out popped cardamom.
Okay. It might be a bit difficult for people to be like visualizing some of this, and I realize I haven't actually defined what like software carbon intensity is, other than saying it's a standard that lets you measure the environmental footprint of things. And the way this currently works is like there are a few like key parts of working out the carbon footprint for something. Generally, the software carbon intensity kind of spec refers to basically how much energy you're using, and then it looks at the carbon intensity of that energy, and then it looks at that for the number of things you're doing, which is like the R figure. So you can think of it as like a functional unit, like maybe I'm running a database, like an AI training job, or visiting a website. That's kind of the general thinking behind this. And so presumably this was something you were looking at saying, well, okay, the R, the kind of functional unit here is maybe a website load, and then you're tracking some of the energy. And there's existing ways to say, well, people talk about there being a footprint at the server side, which is serving the website, a footprint at the kind of hardware side, and all the bits like that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why this can be a bit difficult, and some of the kind of challenges you had to face to kind of get around this, for example.
Yeah, I think one of the first, I guess, challenges is I think we did what most people have done, which is to look for simple proxies, and we quickly kind of realised that the taking single parameter proxies, like for instance cost or data, they don't have the information encoded in those metrics to map to how energy is consumed in a system. So the very first challenge was to move away from this kind of top down modeling to build a picture of a system up from components in so things like CPU and RAM, etc. So that was kind of one of the first challenges that we ran into. How do you what parameters are we going to use if we understand that the energy in a system is consumed through various components? How do we get parameters? We came to the conclusion that the most available parameters that we can find is utilization metrics for these types of components, which are highly available in most infrastructures. In fact, I think probably all infrastructures, and also on end user devices. And so that's kind of that unboxing process led us to those conclusions. And then the question was, well, how do we model these components? And that was a case of scrambling around, reading what other people had done, doing some of our own experiments in this, and kind of those things, those energy component models, kind of the mathematics, are the building blocks of how we approach this problem.
Ah, I see. Okay, so if I'm going to try and translate that, or kind of pull out just repeat back to make sure I understand. So you started with like one of the approaches people take is they have a relatively easy to access but kind of broad top-down approach, where the assumption is that maybe if I was the only person using the internet, all of the power would go to me, right? And then if I'm using, say, half of all the internet transfer, like a data transfer, I would allocate half the footprint to me. Like that does at one level, you can see why you might do that, because it's kind of fair and feels kind of intuitively easy. But if you're kind of building websites, for example, this can leave you with this idea that if you make a website half as big, I mean, or when you look at stuff being sent over the wire, that can give the impression it's basically you've halved the carbon footprint of it, and that's not necessarily the case. There's a bit more to that. So you've been looking at some other things that you can track individually, like how much the computer's running, or what's happening on someone's device, like their browser or on their desktop. That's what I think you're saying. Is that generally the approach you've had to do?
That's basically it, yeah. And I think one of the things that the SCI presents is the is to break out the what's the right word here, is to break out the, I don't want to use the word components because I've just used it, to break out the variables into things that can be modeled and built up separately. So what you were describing there, of taking an approach and kind of saying, well, the carbon footprint of the internet or portion of the system segment or whatever it is, and then attributing our behaviors to a portion of that. If we work the other way and say, well, how is carbon emitted, and break that out into the life cycle of a physical thing, that's what the SCI effectively is doing. It's saying, well, there's a manufacturing process, there's end of life, there's operational, and in that operational bit, we have energy, and then where these things are running. And so where this is a long way around of saying, we focused in the operational bit, we look at the whole picture, but in the operational bit, which is what I was just talking about, we focus on how do you calculate energy, because that's the thing that you can change as practitioners in your roles, and we needed a way to present practitioners with things that they could change.
Something actionable, so
So-
I don't just feel bad. All right, Ollie,
Yeah,
you
but-
seem itchy
yeah.
to say something, so go for
Yeah,
it.
so the way you described it, Chris, was starting with a very big number, like how much data is flowing around the entire internet over a given time period, let's say a year, and then looking at how much energy all of the computers that make up the internet, including end user devices and servers and whatnot, how much do they consume? How much energy do they consume? And then you kind of divide one by the other, and you come up with a kind of number for how much energy is consumed per byte of information sent over the internet. Say, this is often referred to as a top-down model. We're starting with very high-level numbers, and we're cutting them up to attribute them to what you're doing. That is a really simple way. It gets you moving fast, right? You can get numbers for these things, but those numbers generally aren't that reliable because we're talking about astronomically big numbers here. Like if anyone were to try and estimate the amount of data whizzing around the internet, that's going to have a very large error bar attached to that number because it's a very difficult number to get hold of. And it's equally hard to get hold of numbers like how much energy is the whole internet consuming. It's incredibly difficult numbers to get hold of. So although you can make progress and you can put a number on it, you've got two problems. One is the accuracy of the number. How much can we really trust that number? And the other problem is once we've done this, we've boiled the problem down to a single piece of proxy data, which is how much data am I sending over the wire. It doesn't give developers much information about what they can do to improve matters when they're developing their website, because ultimately your whole model comes down to send less data over the wire and you reduce the energy consumption and therefore the CO2. But this doesn't tell developers much. It just basically turns this into a game of reducing the number of bytes. And to give a quick example of why that can sometimes be misleading, I could craft a very small piece of JavaScript which caused the end user's CPU to go absolutely wild. I could write a very simple little
Like an
function,
infinite loop or something.
like
yeah.
exactly like an infinite loop, or calculating pi to the millionth decimal place or something, right? And that constitutes a very small amount of data being sent over the wire, because that program can be written in a very small number of characters. But the result on the other side is that you're device consumes a hell of a lot of energy because it causes your CPU to go absolutely wild.
And
So
the
this is
fans
a
go
really
crazy and everything like that. Oh, I see.
exactly, yeah. So although these proxies are really useful to get started, there are limitations to using a single data point as your proxy. So what we wanted to do is to, instead of going top down, we wanted to go bottom up. So we wanted to take all the different components that consume energy, monitor those whilst we're interacting with web pages, and then add them all together in a kind of bottom up way to get
Okay,
to
I
come
see.
at a number. That's kind of fundamentally how our model works.
And just to add on to that, because that Ollie's talking about the kind of context of developers, coders developing, but one of the questions that we encounter a lot is what can designers do, UI designers, UX designers, etc. And that CPU is of relevance to designers, but there's also a whole load of other things that are of relevance that are in the visual aspects and how interactions are designed as well that that need to, that is helpful to be surfaced, and so that's why we kind of brought the screen energy modeling into the
Yeah.
model is as well, so that there's data there, and also just on the end user device, the screen is a big portion of the energy that gets used and consumed. So it's useful information.
I see. So this is one of the examples, and this is one thing that was in the paper that you spoke about, was like there is a way that you can, even if you're not looking at the screen yourself, you know that something is said, make it this color, which is maybe this bright, and then you can make an assumption saying, well, if they're making the entire page this bright, then you're going to have to make a screen work particularly hard to kind of show that, for example. And like, although not every screen works that way, like in like an organic LED screen might work slightly differently to another screen, but broadly speaking, there's maybe a signal there that you might want to take into account, for example. That's the stuff that you were trying to get at, right?
Yeah, and just by surfacing that information into the conversation, opens up whole other conversations. So, for instance, we built a little Figma tool so that we could surface the color information to a designer. It was a prototype thing, and I showed it to a designer, and they were like, "Well, okay, I get it. I get how this could be useful, but." All of my opportunity to optimize with this information is limited because the branding that had been done on this particular project I'm talking about had been presented with designs, so that it was sort of okay, we had to move further back up the development life cycle to get information out to people, those doing visual branding, the visual identity of the brand. So it's important that when you this information is available and part of the conversation, so that it can get back through the software development product development life cycle to the people who are making decisions. That's really what we're trying to do. Where I would like to get to with all of this stuff is that practitioners, every practitioner and every person making decisions in the product development life cycle has information about the consequence of their decisions. And to do that, I think we have to have a component level model and to surface that data and build KPIs around them.
Okay, so go on, Ollie.
I just want to check something because we're talking a lot about screen energy here, and this is actually part of the model, which is probably more controversial, I'd say. You've already hit on this a little bit, Chris, where you said different screen technologies work differently. So LCD screens, liquid crystal display screens, work differently to LED-based technologies, and it's actually only LED-based technologies that you would expect to see any difference between a bright screen and a dark screen. And so we have to have extra information about who's using your website. This is where we get this information usually from user analytics and whatnot, because it turns out that mobile phones, for example, are much more likely to be running an LED screen than a desktop. So so you have to kind of fuse a lot of information together in order to get the final answer. We also have gone it's controversial, the screen thing, because it's actually I think a lot of techie folks might take exception to the idea that different colors will consume more or less energy. Now, we've read a lot of papers around this, and some papers say absolutely yes, you can measure it, and here's the measurement. We've read other papers where we're saying you can't do it like that, and it's more complicated than that. So what we've decided to do is, for every component that we're measuring, we've basically said you need a function that will take the metrics that you're gathering and convert those metrics into energy, in energy consumption. Now, we've provided in our own implementation our own set of functions, but anyone that wants to make their own implementation of this model, they can replace those functions with other functions or leave them out entirely. So the model is flexible enough to accommodate different kinds of mini models, if you like, for the different components. So if you think, hey, I know exactly what my CPU is, and I don't need to use this kind of generic model for CPU energy consumption. I can tell you exactly what it is. Then you can just replace our function with actual real-world data, or an even better model, which models your specific CPU. So this is kind of how we wanted to go with our implementation of SCI for Web.
Oh, I see.
We wanted it, yeah.
So there's almost like a scalable resolution thing. So if I don't have this data, this is the stuff I'm using, and you can go to quite a lot of detail depending on the level of access you might have to, I don't know, devices people are running, servers and stuff like that. And this is, we've been outside of this podcast, I've been having to work on stuff like this, and I bumped up against data about access to information all the time. And you mentioned straight away there was things like analytics, and you said okay, there's a paper, but I understand that you're both practitioners. Maybe we could talk a little bit about what the experience was, building something and what you learn along the way there, and how you have to kind of work around some of that stuff. Because as far as I'm aware, you've shared this paper, which is in the public domain, so people can understand that. But there is also some code on GitHub under a kind of source available license, so they can see how some of these assumptions are being made, for example. And you've actually got a running platform as well. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the experiences of building something in the open, with the source available thing, and then moving towards, here's what someone who's listening to this for the first time can try out, just to kind of get an idea of what this stuff is looking like, to test against maybe a site they use themselves, for example.
Yeah, I think there are a few questions that come up a lot, and what we've tried to do. So this paper that we've done is an expression of the mathematics that underpins a load of useful stuff, and we've built some of that stuff. And so one of the things that the SCI does and what it's designed to do is to be able to measure the emissions of a thing. So your per hour you were talking about, whether that's per shopping transaction or per some sort of user journey. So there's measurement of user journeys. That's one of the things that we can do, and we've implemented. One of the other ones is I want to footprint my website. I want to understand the emissions associated with it across the hosting, across the network and the end users. It's like my whole website. So we've built some tooling to help us to do that as well, and that's where we run into the access to information. So on the front end,
the access to information problems, right? Just to be clear, that's what you're saying, yeah?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. This is a base. Okay, so how do we get the data to do this footprinting task? I know a lot of people don't like that word, but I apologise for using it. This estimation task, shall we say? And on the end user side, how we do it is we connect your analytics platform, and we have the pages in your platform. If it's really, really big, then we will sample the pages. We have a sampling technique, which we've done this first paper, and there's going to be 3 or 4 more. The third will be on the sampling techniques that we use, which is a technique called weighted reservoir sampling. So we can now take a sample of pages and measure them, and we run interaction tests on them. And whilst we're doing that, we're recording the metrics, and then we run them through the energy models. And so then we can estimate the impact of your end users. On the hosting side is where it gets trickier, which seems like it should be the other way around, because you should have better information on the hosting side than you do on the end user side. But the challenge we
that's
face.
where I'm a customer as well. Like I'm paying to use something. So okay, yeah, go on.
Yeah, and the conversation that we run into time and time again when an organisation approaches us to, yes, we want to do this emissions estimation task, is we could do all of this work on the end user side using our reference device approach, but hosting, we go to the hosting vendor and then they go, well, it's really hard for us to get that data, or we can't get that data, and so what we do is what we were doing was we were going, okay, we'll give them like a 3-strike thing. So we'll ask them again and say, no, you can do it because you just need to do this. And then on the third time they say no, we go, okay, you're on the naughty list, the naughty vendor list. And that's the kind of process we were going through. And then it got to a point where, how do we actually help people, organizations, individuals move past this? And that then led us to kind of the other bank of questions, which is how does a company have real confidence that they are hosting on greener infrastructure in greener data centers, and how do they get the data that backs that up and evidences that? And that's the third kind of batch of questions that our platform.
Yeah, we were hitting into that. It's just a brick wall. Most hosting providers, even like cloud infrastructure, that the terrible free, AWS and Google and all of that. They just don't.
The big three today.
We're from the big.
Yes.
We're the big three. The big three. But the information just isn't there most of the time. Most of the hosting providers that we spoke to, I think it's more that they just don't care, because they're not getting paid to surface this information. They probably could, but they're going to have to get on a call to one of their tech people to go and find it. They don't have the time, and so they just don't do it. So you just hit a brick wall, and this was really frustrating. And ultimately, it led us to just go, well, why aren't we hosting our customers' websites in infrastructure that we control? We know exactly what they're running and where they're running it. And we can bake all of this measurement straight into the back of our hosting platform, which is ultimately what we're moving towards now.
So you started out saying, okay, we've got this paper, we're going to build this and show how you can use it. And then you created there's like a live service that people can use. And now there are so many challenges. You're like, well, okay, if we don't have access to this, we're now actually saying, well, if we build one way to make sure that we've got good access to the numbers is actually build some of the hosting infrastructure ourselves and just let people run workloads and websites on that itself. At least you'll have the numbers that way. That's kind of the approach that you've ended up coming to for some of this so far.
Yeah, because once we had done that kind of auditing process, it was like, well, okay, what then the questions are, okay, how do we change some of this stuff? Some of that stuff is addressing the product development or the website development lifecycle, and some of it is, and this is the E times I bit of the
it's like energy
SCI.
times intensity here, like how clean is the power and how much am I using? Yeah.
Exactly, and so what one of your options there in optimizing the carbon intensity is where and when it runs, and so that is an option that in the deployment sense that you can take, and that's what led us down that path.
So basically, let's say I'm running various websites. One approach I can take is using something like this. I can, if I want absolute transparency, I can go like this is the nuclear option, which is like running everything on totally separate infrastructure, which gives me all these numbers. I mean, maybe not nuclear option is the correct term, but like that's one way I can be really, really sure. But there's like presumably some kind of sliding scale. So like that's how I can see what it looks like. But it may be that if I'm running stuff on my existing infrastructure, because we were speaking about something like a kind of scalable model where there's different degrees of resolution, there may be a trade-off I have to accept. Like the numbers might not be quite as precise or quite as accurate, but I'm not having to run everything elsewhere. Like that's the idea behind one of these kind of scalable models that you folks are talking about. And then there's also, you mentioned that in addition to having a paper, there's actually like a reference version of how some of this works so people can understand some of the assumptions. Maybe we could talk a little bit about actually some of the code that's in the public domain. So if someone wants to kind of like play around with this, I know they can go to say like cardamon.io to try this. But if they wanted to figure out what things run on their own server, for example, or maybe if they're a product manager and they want to speak to their techie, their lead developer, they would point them to some of the stuff that might run on the servers as well, right? Is that what some of the things on GitHub might be, like
Yeah,
the source available stuff?
yeah, that's correct. We actually, right back at the start of all of this, before we got into focusing on measuring websites and web applications, we wanted to just have a method of measuring any software process that's running. And nowadays, a lot of processes are run in containers, and so we needed a way of easily spinning up that process and in sort of wrapping something around it in order to kind of measure the energy consumption of that process whilst it's running. So we developed right at the beginning a tool which is online. You can go and check it out. It's called Cardamon Core because it's kind of quite a core part of
the wider
the wider platform. And it is a tool that basically allows you to define scenarios. These are kind of use cases of your application, and to describe to Cardamon Core how to spin that service up, either in Docker or as a bare metal, service running on your computer, and then it will attach itself to that process and monitor it and run it through our model, and then give you an answer. So that is available online, and what we're doing with Cardamon-Web, like give it a name, I guess, is we've expanded that to web applications and websites, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to do in order to get the metrics, because now we're not talking about a single process running on one computer. You're talking about processes
like
running all over
and a server, and then there were all the other moving parts.
And that's what is running when we do measurements for our clients.
Oh, I see. Okay, so there's basically this notion of like an end-to-end thing where I'm simulating, or I'm able to like drive a device, like be it like a maybe modeled out mobile phone or a browser or something like that, tell it to do various like user journeys that a real human would be doing, and then there's something where then you're actually running some actual software itself. So let's say, where I work at the Green Web Foundation, we have a Django application. We know people use it a certain way. As long as I can put it in containers, I could run it in something like Cardamon to get some figures from each of these. Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
So
exactly.
That's not that. Okay. So that's actually that's useful to know, because that's quite similar to what we saw. So at EcoCompute, Ollie, I'm not sure if you were in the event where there was the CEO of Nextcloud, which is essentially like a competitor to Google Cloud, Google Drive, and things like that. He was talking about how he's using a tool called Green Metrics tool, which seems to do a very similar thing, where you're specifying particular user journeys. You're putting them in a kind of harness of all the infrastructure you need to run that, and then running on a kind of like continuous integration basis. So every single time they make a change, they're seeing if they've introduced a bug that kind of doubles the energy and stuff like that. It sounds like you're doing something somewhat comparable then as well, right?
Yeah, I did see that talk, and I'm a huge fan of Arne and Didi and the stuff that's going on over in Berlin, and so very familiar with Green Metrics tool, and it's there's basically a few ways
that was Ollie's brain just there.
The
ding, ding.
Your
noise.
phone.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
Ding, ding, ding.
sometimes Ollie's brain makes a loud noise just when he's thinking. It's strange, but
Yeah.
just go with it.
Yeah, basically, the way I see the measurement space is that you've got single data point proxies. So SWD and the likes of that. And you've got a whole bunch of tools that basically
The
implement the
sustainable web design
SWD.
model there, where you're referring to
Sorry, yeah.
SWD, right? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. And these are tools that rely on the modeling technique that you introduced earlier,
Yep.
that we spoke about earlier. Then you've got sort of almost direct measurement of energy, and that's where the green metrics tool sits, along with a few others as well. I think Kepler would sort of sit in that place as well. And these tools are very accurate, but generally take a bit more effort to set up. You've got to be a lot more techie to use those tools, but they do a very, very good job. And then what we were trying to do with Cardamon is kind of sit in between to go, we want something to be easy to use and accurate enough, and sort of sit in that sweet spot in between. So that's where we are trying to get Cardamon to sit in that space.
Now I understand. So that would explain why you've got like the webby thing that you can try out for a single page, and then you've got something you can run internally to go for the kind of green metrics tool, GMT style, quite detailed information if you have that access, or if you are able to get that kind of precision, right?
Exactly, because if people are looking for a really quick, simple experience to get an idea of their web emissions, there are loads of tools that sit on top of the SWD, and they absolutely should use those tools. They're all brilliant tools. And if you want to get really detailed, like down into the real nitty gritty, go pick up Green Metrics tool, Kepler, things like that.
Or
These are
Scaphandra,
fantastic tools, or
Okay.
Scaphandra, yeah, all of these sorts of things. We wanted to just sort of sit in between those two, and give a kind of middle ground option. So yeah, that's basically it. Yeah.
That's a huge relief to hear, as someone who's trying to develop some kind of standard. Because the thing I can share with you and for people who might be interested is that in the Green Software Foundation, we're involved with putting together some standard like this, and we've been involved in informal conversations before this anyway. And one of the things that we were quite keen to do was basically look at stuff that's currently out there in the public domain that people currently do use, to say, well, rather, if we're going to create a standard that we expect people to use, you really do need to have stuff that's in the public domain that people can try using to kind of show what like this being implemented into a real thing looks like. And it's actually, I'm very, very relieved that there's now, it sounds like there's multiple examples of these approaches of like modeling things end to end and say, look, this is the way you're probably going to need to do this. Because I mean, if there was only GMT or there was only you, then I'd feel a little bit uncomfortable. But the fact that we're seeing a kind of a few trends here, that makes me think that by the end of this project that's taking place, I reckon there's scope for something to be like compatible across multiple providers, for example. So we can finally start having some meaningful numbers and some meaningful data for this. So that's actually kind of encouraging from that point of view. So for me, I'm kind of relaxed. I'm that's a relief to hear you explain it that way.
Yeah, we've seen it really mature. This space really mature over. We've only been going for almost 3 years now, something like that. Just over 2 years maybe. And when we started, we had to develop Cardamon, because there was nothing. Like there was nothing in that space. So over that time, we've seen so many other people come into this space and provide really good tooling around measurement of websites, web apps, and other types of applications too. I think that this space is mature enough now to start talking about creating standards, because we've got multiple examples of how you would go about doing this, and we can see this. Exactly, we can see the strengths and weaknesses. We can see what works, what didn't work, what works in this situation, what doesn't work in that situation. And there's so I think it's a really good time to start thinking about how do we standardize this now.
All right, so that gives us an idea of where we are, and we're not in the kind of lamentable state that we were previously, or at least there is like some sign that things aren't being as bad as they were a few years ago. Maybe I should ask, like, okay, so you folks are thinking about this a lot. What do you see as like what's next if you're at the point where we're starting to get something like here? Because it sounds like there's two directions. There is either, actually no, I'm just going to put it like this. Yeah, I mean, things are starting to kind of settle down somewhat. Like, where is the next? Is it something like simulating things happening on the device a bit better, or is it something more to do with servers, or is it where is your attention being focused the most these days?
Yeah. Do you mean like what's next for us, or what's next for the industry to
I'd say with you
improve?
folks, because you're having to build something right now that does have to solve some of these
Yeah.
issues, like user-defined, like simulation of the way people, a user journey that's some of the way that humans might understand it. Like that's something that you've described before, for example. Like, what's the next big challenge do you think that you're going to have to solve now that you've got a paper and you essentially implementing your paper in a platform that you have available for people, for example?
The next big challenge for me, we might have different answers to this because we are partitioning our focuses, I would say. So my next big technical challenge is to take data from one of the biggest websites in the
Mm-hmm.
in the world, apply this reservoir sampling technique to it, and take a measurement of in mainly kind of the end user side, which is, so that's my kind of next real like technical challenge.
Mm.
Then we have like for us we have lots of commercial challenges as well, because we're trying to just present a simple answer to, or a
Mm-hmm.
simple option to organizations who want to understand the impact of their websites and web applications.
Mm.
And so we've come up with a way to do that, and which is host in this platform, use this platform, and
Mm.
you will get all of this data for free. That's it. It's that simple. All the end user stuff and all the network stuff. So that presents new challenges for me and Ollie, because we're very
Yeah,
technical, and
yeah.
so that's our personal kind of challenges. And then Ollie's working on some other stuff. When he spoke at Eco Compute about something
I
interesting, he's working on.
can't dive into the discussion about jamming an AI renderer inside to the browser, Ollie. But
Yeah,
it was a fun talk. But
yeah.
yeah.
That I know, I absolutely. That was a side project. It's another one of my crazy ideas that I just had to try out. But no, I mean, what I'm working on in the measurement kind of world is we're setting up this kind of hosting platform, or sort of a platform as a service offering, with cardamon baked into the back of it, and a guarantee that any services running within that PaaS platform are running on green data centers that we've kind of audited and gone, yes, we like this data center, so we're currently building that service inside Scaleway, because we really like what the folks at Scaleway are up to. I think they are leaders in the sort of data center, green data center, and transparency, definitely. They're leaders there, so we really like what they're doing. So we're building our platform on top of that at the moment. So
I did
that's
not
what
know it
I've
was Scaleway. That's
been.
interesting. Vive
Yeah.
la France. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that they've developed a really good service there. So they're kind of like the infrastructure as a service
And you're building the
thing,
next layer up.
and we're building our stuff on top of that. Yeah, and that's I'm pleased to say going well, and should be able to provide some
Ah.
level of hosting very, very soon on that. I think, as Adam said, our biggest challenge is how do we get this to in front of people, because we're both techies.
Yeah.
We're nerds. We like numbers and graphs and code, and it is a difficult challenge to try and get good at the business side of
Telling the
things, and the
stories, yeah?
marketing. Yeah, the marketing side of things and everything is really hard. I personally find that hard. I know Adam doesn't struggle so much with that kind of stuff, but
This is
I
one
know my
thing.
lane.
I'm really glad you said that, because This is actually part of a pattern I've seen elsewhere. So at EcoCompute, the conference in Berlin, I noticed that we have no commercial relationship with Scaleway, by the way, as a podcast or anything like that. They just are one of the groups that are a bit more transparent than other ones. And this is the second example I've seen of it being used like an actual competitive advantage, because Green PT, like the kind of green version of ChatGPT, they did an entire talk about saying, yeah, we are sharing this, and they use Scaleway under the hood as well, because the access to these metrics is one thing that allows them to show all the numbers, to show like, here's how you can prompt more sustainably, for example, or here's how to do things in a transparent way that people aren't doing elsewhere. I hadn't realized that you folks are doing the same, using the same actually. That's an interesting bit of intel. Wow.
I didn't know that Green PT were doing that either. So that's nice to know that we've both hit on the same thing.
Yeah, but equally, this might embark another conversation for another time. But there's this amazing organisation called the Green Web Foundation, and they have this verification process, right, for the thing. And I know that you know a lot about that, but for listeners, and so I think there's opportunities there to take these steps in the verification process and kind of
ask for something inside. Can you provide these numbers, or can you provide some transparency or something?
yeah,
Right?
exactly, and trying to say, well, there's green, there's being green as in you're in a region with low carbon intensity. There's being green because you have a low PUE and low WUE. There's all sorts of ways to be green or be more sustainable is probably a better term for it. And how do we get all of this information out? So we're just saying you customer, don't worry about it. We are going to choose vendors that are in green infrastructure. Scaleway is a good example, but there's other examples as well. And so we're going to partner in a way. We haven't partnered with Scaleway, but that's what we're going to do, and that's how to take that away from you. But there's many ways that we could go as an industry about looking at the data that
show me the providers that give me these guarantees about the greenness of power, these guarantees about the kind of like quality of data that I can build upon and everything like that. Yeah, I will happily add that to our roadmap as a thing to talk about ourselves. So yeah, Adam, I hadn't realized that, but that's definitely a conversation to have. All right, gents, we're coming up to time, so I want to just ask, if people found any of this interesting, this deep dive, where do people learn more about your work in future? Because we're going to have show notes linking to papers and the websites and the things we've spoken about. But for people who don't make it to those show notes, what should they remember to put into their search engine of choice, for example? What should they be looking for?
Cardamon.io, rootandbranch.io. For us personally, it would be our LinkedIn. Mine is ACA Newman, Adam Christopher Aloysius Newman. There you go. My Irish heritage has found its way into the podcast. If you want to know more about fish and chips, I would say visit Coventry and ask for a scallop batch. I'll say that. There's also, I think there's loads of just brilliant resources out there. If you go to greensoftwarebrighton.co.uk, we've got a little thing of resources, and that green metrics tool will be on there, for example. All sorts of things that are on there. The one thing that didn't come up in this conversation yet, actually, is that we run a community in Brighton, and the Green Software Foundation support that, as well as an awesome community organisation in Brighton called Silicon Brighton. So anybody in the southeast-ish area and travelable to Brighton, every third Wednesday we are at a place called Runway East, which are kind of a co-working office space, and they also awesome kind of volunteer their space for us once a month. So that's another place. Ollie, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, I think that's the only one that we haven't really mentioned is the community, Green Software Brighton. It's awesome. I love being sort of part of it. I think it's one of the best things that we've set up. It's really cool.
It's how we started, really, because Ollie came around my house and asked have you thought about the emissions of your code, which is how all this started. And the very first thing we did when we scratched away and we found we were really interested in this, we were like, well, should we talk about it? And we did a talk at a place in Brighton called RAP, and yes, people turned up. So that was the start of all of this for us personally, but also just the community. Then we started the community, then we started Cardamon, then we started Newman Branch. So it all started with that.
All started with finding out that you're no longer shouting into the void.
You're not
Exactly.
alone.
You're not
Exactly.
alone. That feels like a very nice high point to end this on. Thanks a lot, folks. I really enjoyed this conversation, and we'll make a point of making sure that people have links to all the things, particularly if there are any unexpected spellings for this, like cardamom ending with an N, not an M for mouse, and stuff like that. Cheers, fellas.
Cool.
Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Yeah. Cheers.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just a reminder to follow Environment Variables on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please do leave a rating and review if you like what we're doing. It helps other people discover the show, and of course, we'd love to have more listeners. To find out more about the Green Software Foundation, please visit greensoftware.foundation. That's greensoftware.foundation in any browser. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.